All right, we're ready to go. Okay. All right.
One of our positions, part-time positions, just denied it because it was discriminatory.
Hi, Brian.
Hey.
You can sit
We're
up
light on
here.
council members, so
Yeah.
if you want to stay back.
Yeah, we can start them. One other person was like,
You want me to just jump in then?
yeah.
Okay, so Caroline's asked me to just go ahead and get started. So we're gonna be talking about capital financial planning, where we're gonna talk about all your large projects, how you can size, schedule them, what strategies you might use to pay for them. I use a computerized, just basically a spreadsheet which uses graphs. So whenever you guys ask me to make changes, you'll immediately see the changes to tax rate and utility rates, things like that. What I like to do is first kind of just briefly touch on a couple of things in your audit as sort of a baseline. So up above there, you see the general fund in the left-hand column. And what I'd like you to focus on is a couple of things. Number one, the total expenditures in 2021 out of the general fund, which is your main operating fund, $3.1 million. And the reason that number is important is because your general fund is primarily funded by two things: your property tax levy and your local government aid. Both of those are received in two big chunks, once in June and then once in December. So it's important that you maintain, at the end of the year, you always want 6 months at least reserves available, because you have a lot of cash to start in January. You start paying bills down to June and your cash goes down. Then you get your first big chunk of revenue, it jumps back up and it goes back down to December, and then we need it to jump back up. So we'd like to have at least half of that 3.1 million. So then we scoot down a little bit and we take a look at your fund balance. And the fund balance at the end of the year is 1.8 million, which normally would be a good sign, and it still is for you, but we have to always check things. It says my internet connection is unstable, by the way. So 1.8 million versus 3.1 million, you are over the 6 months reserves, right? But let's make sure that that's cash, because fund balance is a function of assets minus liability. And assets doesn't necessarily just mean cash. So if I just scroll up to the balance sheet of the general fund, so of that 1.86 million, 1.7 million is cash. And then sometimes what can happen is in that cash, it can be reserved or committed for a certain purpose other than operational spending. What we want is as much of that cash as possible to be in the unassigned category. So as we scroll back down to the bottom here, about 1.8 million is almost all of your fund balance is unassigned. So that's fantastic. So we're in good shape there, right? That's the main thing that we look at in the general fund. But I would just simply point out, even though you're a little bit above 6 months worth of reserves, I would tell you to be hesitant to use deficit budgeting in the future. Let's not let that dip, right? If anything, you want that fund balance to be stable or even slightly growing from year to year, even if it's just a minuscule amount, just to keep up with your ever increasing budgets. So the next thing that I tend to look at is water and sewer. And I like to go to the cash flow page. This is the revenue and expense page. But the reason I don't like this page is because it carries depreciation in the fund, and it doesn't include principal payments for debt. So you don't get a very clear picture of the system. The other thing is it talks about net position in water and sewer. In the general fund, your fund balance is a nice number because there's no shenanigans in the number. With water and sewer, they're adding in the value of assets in your net position, which to me is BS, because let's say you needed money in a pinch. Are you going to sell your water tower? Who are you going to sell it to, right? So I don't know why they make you report things. So I skip right through this. I go right to the cash flow statement. And if we get down to the bottom here, So at the beginning of the year, the water fund started with 290,000, and at the end of the year, it ended with 424,000. If the ending number is bigger than the first number, you have, at least in part, covered depreciation. Your auditors, they will tell you, you want to have your revenue sufficient to cover depreciation. I would tell you that's impossible. I'm not really aware of any town that does. If you set your rates and charges sufficient to cover fully depreciation, your rates and charges would be so high. So the anecdote I usually give is, imagine you have a car payment and you're paying $300-400 a month for your car, and that thing's going to depreciate over 5 years. Are you putting $300 to $400 a month away into your checking account to buy the next car with cash? Probably not. But you might be putting $100 away to help as a down payment, right? So that's kind of what I see here. Same thing with the sewer, gained $111,000 in cash, and these were fairly typical years. But we've got a lot of projects that we're going to be talking about today. So, this can change. So if we talk about utility rate adjustments, one of the things, like utility commissions, well, the city of Chatfield, as an example, they had like $1 million in their utility funds. And the question is, why would we raise rates? And it's like, it's not because you need to raise rates right now. It's because you've got this big need hovering in the horizon. Let's start adjusting rates slowly over time, as opposed to waiting 15 years and then killing everybody all at once. So with that as sort of a preliminary. Hopefully everyone now can see a spreadsheet. So this is a convoluted data entry.
Yeah, just
Right there,
Yeah.
perfect, okay. Now, I told you everything's going to be done graphically, and it is, but I got to have an input page. So what you're looking at here, all in this area here, is a bunch of assumptions. I'm going to just highlight a couple of them. But who here has seen this before? Okay, you have. Well, just let me give you a 20-second review of how this worked. So, okay, let's just use the Trunk Highway 60 project. So we've got a $6.4 million project in today's dollars. Let me take out this money here. All right. Now, notice that under year built, it says 0. So the model, unless I have a year plugged in, the model disregards the project. These red numbers are just notes to myself. So if I plug in 2026, it's going to add inflation. So that 6.4 million becomes 8.7 million in 26. Are we issuing general obligation bonds to pay for the debt, or are we going to use cash or a blend? Sometimes a blend. If it is debt, how many years? What's the projected interest rate? There's our actual annual payment. And then how much of somebody's taxes of their city taxes is assigned to making this. It doesn't mean their taxes are going to necessarily go up by this amount, but whatever their taxes are, how much of it is going towards this project versus snow plowing, as an example. But since we had some cash, I can't remember what the number was. Was it 5 million or 500,000? Can't remember what it was. But notice now the borrowing went from that 8.7 down to 3.7. So we can do a blended thing. We can do borrowing and we can do cash, or we can do all cash. And then this payment, notice there's no taxes being applied to the project. And that's because to make the payment, I've got various revenues to help make that payment. And I've got 100% on other. And I think that's barge revenues. Okay.
We talked about sales tax too.
And then what happens is, depending if we use taxes or if we use water, sewer, whatever we plug in here, that's going to make the graphs change. So let me just zero everything back out. There it was 5 million. Okay. Notice I have all zeros in all these projects. So that means the model, when I show you the graphs, is first going to disregard all the projects. Let's just talk about a couple of these assumptions. First off, in water and sewer, other than just regular operational spending, and I have that increasing year to year, it's not flat, it's expected to increase. I have a generic 40,000 out of sewer and 25,000 a year out of water, just for frozen pipe, whatever, right? We're going to measure the impact starting in 2017. We're going to take a house that was valued at $150,000 at the time, and it was increasing 4% a year. So the value doesn't stay flat, except for In 2022, this year, and then going into next, I have it at 10% and a 15% increase. I expect you've all seen significant bumps in your values. Okay. I have inflation set at 8% for your construction. I have your spending. Remember, I talked about water and sewer increasing. I also have your general fund baseline operations increasing 5% a year. And I have your tax base only growing at 4% a year. Let me take this out for a moment. I have no increases in water and sewer right now. And I understand the preliminary levy number is currently being considered as that 15% increase from last year. So if we increase our levy 15% and our tax base next year only goes up 4%, you can probably imagine what's going to happen. So let's look at the tax rate page. And remember, I have not added any, give it a second, there it goes. I haven't added any projects. This is your tax rate. The blue portion is the portion of your budget going to the capital improvement fund. You have a set aside fund. We talked about the 1.8 million in your general fund. You have a set aside fund that you're putting money into. 150,000 is going into that fund for vehicle replacement, capital spending, and another 30,000 is going for fire as well.
Could you quickly explain what tax rate
Yes.
on the y-axis really is?
Yes. It's a very simple formula where we take the total levy. So in your case, your preliminary levy is, what was it, 1 point something million. Hello, thank you. 2 point something million. So when staff is working with you to do the budget, there you probably start with expenditures. So in the general fund, we need to plow snow, police protection, fire, all these things that we have to do as a government. And then they're going to start looking at their revenues, dog tags, liquor licenses, and whatever. And there's going to be a shortfall. You levy whatever you need to make that balance, right? So you don't have a deficit budget. So, and then you also levy for things like certain bonds, you levy for that kind of stuff, Port Authority, those things. So there's your dollar figure. Now we take that dollar figure and we divide it by the tax base of the city, sometimes called tax capacity of the city. Those two numbers equal your tax rate. Levy divided by tax base is tax rate.
I've gotten a question because some cities we've seen when I've shared go beyond 100%.
Absolutely.
So Brian, I think asked, how is it possible that someone goes 110, 100%
Yep.
over?
So I like the word tax base versus tax capacity. They're the same thing. But the reason I do is because of that question, because tax capacity makes it seem like there's some limit, right? There isn't any limit. I like to use tax base. It's simply the base from which your taxes are calculated. So we take that levy, we divide it by your tax rate. And if your levy is more than your tax base of the entire city, then you're going to have higher than 100% just for your city taxes. This formula is used for the county. This formula is used for the school. The school has a second set of taxes that are not based on this, but primarily that's going to be the main portion of their taxes. So when we look at your tax rate.
So what exactly is a tax base?
Wow, okay. So tax base, this is Minnesota property taxes 101, all right? The math is simple, remembering it is hard. It all starts with, since you're recording this, I'm going to do it this way. It all starts with market value, and this is set by the county assessor. I better not abbreviate that one. He comes in and says, hey, your place is worth X amount of dollars. And you might have a house worth 100,000, or you might have a business worth 100,000. But the business is going to pay more in taxes, even though it has the same value because of tax base issues. So what's next? The next part of this is set by the state, and it's the classification rate. I'll just call it the class rate. So for single family homes up to $500,000, that class rate is 1%. For businesses up to $150,000, that class rate's 1.5%. And anything over 150,000 is 2%. Let me change this here. So if let's say this house is 100,000 and its class rate is 1%, I take that 100,000 and oops. Come on, fat fingers. Multiply that by that 1%. This house has a tax base of $1,000. That's just the base. So if we go to your tax rate page and we see a tax rate here of 85%, now we simply, I'm going to call this tax base or tax, I'll go TC for tax capacity. After I just got done telling you I don't like that name. If it's 85%, then obviously your city taxes, just city taxes, is $850. You follow? So to get the tax base of the city, I take this $100,000 home times 1%. I take that $100,000 business times 1.5%. I take that $100,000 apartment times 1.25%. There's like 30 or 40 different class rates. Okay, Department of Revenue, if you ever want to know them, you can Google it. Then we get that tax base for each parcel of the city, we add them all up, and that's your tax base of the city. So,
And in the budget every year, that's something he has plugged in, whatever, and we get that tax base from the county every year. And we never really finalize that number towards the end of the year, but we generally apply like a percentage increase since last year.
right, so it doesn't always happen, but from time to time, counties don't have your tax base information for the next year. So you have to set your preliminary levy in September. You are basically flying blind as to what your tax rate will be next year, because you don't know what the tax base will be next year unless the county tells you. So whatever you set for your preliminary levy, then in October or so, when they do have that number, they're going to figure out what that tax rate is. And then I think it's either late October or November, they send the notices out for your proposed taxes. And, you know, that's why it's so difficult, because you're trying to set a preliminary levy and you want to set it kind of high because you know you can back off in December, but you can't increase it. So you want to make sure you go high so you can cut back. But how high do you go knowing that those notices are going to go out and you don't want a bunch of people, you know, with pitchforks and torches, right? So as we look at this tax rate, if we have a levy increase of 15% and I plug in the generic 4% that I had been using before, it's obvious that your tax rate would spike. Now, here's the thing, your tax rate, and historically over the last several years, your tax base has grown at about 4%. But this year's weird because everyone's seeing their values jack up. So I think it's going to be somewhere between 10 and 15%. So if I plug in, let's say the low end 10%, and this is a guesstimate, right? It's a calculated guess as to what it might be. Watch what happens with that tax rate. Boom, it comes down some. So, but you can see the trend here. And basically the trend is the growth in levy has outpaced the growth in tax base. Now, if it comes in at the high end, it should be flat. Give it a second. There, see, it's flat. And in the past, we've kind of done that in the past with cities where we've said, you know, if your idea is to keep your tax rate fairly flat from year to year, you should budget to a tax rate. So if the county says your tax base is going up 8% next year, then you know you can go 8% on the levy and keep the tax rate flat. And then there would be an increase in somebody's taxes because their values aren't going to stay flat. But it would be a moderate increase. But this year's weird. If you were to budget to a tax rate this year, I mean, it could be weird. So at least for now, let's stick with the 10%, and then council, we can do whatever you like in terms of projecting, but let's just use that as the basis. So of your levy, the purple part of your tax rate is that part of your levy for putting money away to the capital improvement fund, rainy day money for equipment, whatever. The yellow portion is that part of your levy that's associated with debt. And so you can see as you pay off debt, that goes extremely low here. And I know this big drop is because in 2013, we did a big street bond. That's kind of going offline. And so that's why you see that drop. So the reason that's important to visualize that is because if you say, hey, can we do a project in 23? If you do a debt in 23, it doesn't hit your budget till 24. So if we do something in 23, you can see you can take advantage of that drop if you want to. Right? That's why that's important. The green portion is everything else. Anything else that you're funding, that's in the green. So if we don't add anything, that's kind of what you're looking at. Let's look at water. So we see, we had some rough years here early on, but we've been scraping our way out. And then in 21, from 20, you can see how we've been gaining cash, just like I said in the audit. And you can see that's in direct line with our rate increases over the years in water. And this rate increase is based, this bottom graph is based on a 5,000 gallon user. So if somebody, I just use that because it's sort of a typical standard to compare. I would tell you that if we're here in 21 with a water bill of just over $20 a month, your water rates are low. Most cities are going to be pushing closer to $30 a month. Your tax rate's a different story. That's sort of pick 'em, which cities you want to compare to. If I compare you to my home county of Fillmore County, any of the cities there, you've got a crazy low tax rate. If I compare you to Plainview, I think you're going to be less than Plainview. But if I compare you to, let's say, Eota, you're high, right? So just St. Charles, you're high. Pick and choose. But water and sewer is generally pretty easy to do. Now on your sewer bill, you're going to be at about $60 a month. And what is it? Come on, hover. Yeah, just about $60 a month. That may be a titch high, but it's in the realm, right? I'd say most people are in the high 40s, low 50s kind of a thing. So sewer, we did have a little gain there in 21. Now you'll notice in 22, notice how the cash just goes crazy. That's because you have some debt that's being partially supported by sewer and it goes offline at that time. So that frees up revenue and your cash goes out there. Remember, I haven't added any projects, but you will see that as part of the strategy that we've put together kind of behind the scenes, a strategy you might completely disagree with, and that's fine. But it was to lean a little bit more on utilities than taxes in order to pay for some of these projects that we've got on the list, because you can see that's an asset right there. And you can see the water is an asset as well. Okay, here's that capital outlay fund. Now, this is the one where you're putting 150,000 away for most governmental items, but there's 30,000 also going for fire. It's all accounted for in the same one fund. And I didn't give you the detail on this in my spreadsheets, but staff is good enough to give me their replacement schedules. So I just plugged that stuff in behind the scenes. So based on that money going in, money being spent every year, you can see we do pretty well. And usually when I see a little dip like this below zero, I'm not too concerned because you can kind of take care of that easy with some budgeting. But you see there's a big dip here, and I want to say that might have been a ladder truck.
Yeah, that's a ladder truck in 2032.
Yep, 2032.
1.3 million we have in it for it. Yeah.
So you might, when we get out there, I wouldn't say change the plan now because that's so far out. But what I would say is you might finance that ladder truck or maybe part of it, at least for a few years until you get that back into the positive. So again, with no projects being added, no rate increases above what we have, remember that $150,000 house that was going up 4% a year, except for the last 2 years, we bumped it even more. Based on what we did is we took the total taxes, the total sewer, and the total water that house paid for the year in 2017. And we said on a monthly basis, and we did it on a monthly basis because most people budget month to month. So even though your taxes are due twice a year, a lot of people escrow them into their mortgage. So everyone's thinking about things monthly. If that was to grow by 3% a year, it would track with this red line right here. And if it was to grow at 5% a year, it would track with this line. So you see we have this spike in 22 and 23, in part because of those huge value increases. You see it drops back down in 23 and 24 because that's that debt that's going offline. If you remember the yellow from the tax rate. And so generally in the past, I've worked with my cities. I've always tried to fit along with this 3% line, but in today's inflationary environment, I just don't think that's possible. Oh, and the way to read this, by the way, is in 2000, let's use 2024 because it's pretty close. In 2024, this hypothetical home is going to pay about $50 more per month than it did in 2017. Or you can compare it year to year. So in 2023, well, let's see, that's 65. Wait, that's like $25 a month more from year to year. So you can just look at the difference from year to year or compare it back to the original year. And to give you an idea, what is that house worth in 23? 221,000. Just two more graphs and then we'll,
Question for you.
yes,
Mike.
yes, please.
The capital outlay fund graph, that assumes a recurring
180.
180 plus a factor of percentage of increase, just 180.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me check that. Yes, flat.
Okay.
But it also has some franchise fees? What was
Franchise
it?
fees.
Yep, starting and going in there next year.
It's coming,
Yeah, okay.
coming. Yeah.
Both that revenue is in there unless you change it. I think you're gonna pay it off and then you change it.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't include dock revenue, because that was going back into the operating fund till it gets paid off. Okay. So that's good news. Okay.
Debt per capita, we take your total outstanding debt and we divide it by your population. So as your population slowly grows, but more importantly, as you pay off principal, that ratio goes down. How much debt per person in the city? We can, if possible, like to stay below 5,000 debt per capita. Also, we take your total debt and we divide it by the market value of the city, and we usually like that to be below 10%. Anything above those items, all of a sudden you're into elevated debt territory, which in itself is not the end of the world. It just means you might get dinged a little bit on an interest rate if you could do a public borrowing. But if you do a borrowing through like a USDA or PFA, which is federal government or state government loans, they don't care. In which case, then it's not a problem. But it's something to just keep an eye on. So, questions so far? That's kind of where we're headed without adding anything, and we got a lot to add. All right, okay. So let's kind of summarize what we got down here. And I don't have them in order, I'm sorry. But it looks like the first, maybe most important thing is a big, huge downtown improvement project is that street and utilities, correct?
Mhm.
So originally we had planned on this being state loans, PFA funding, but it appears that funding might have dried up. We don't know if it'll be replenished next year or not. So I was asked to kind of consider this a regular borrowing, public sale kind of thing. Just recognize if we plug anything in here, you haven't committed to anything. All we're showing you is impacts, right? So let's say we do that project in 2023. So our annual payment is $475,000, and that's based on let me get rid of the cash so you can see the inflation. Oh, we used present value. This is the one that we used present value. And then if you had 1.7 million from county and
Local road.
local road improvement. Thank you. God, I was trying to remember the acronym and sound smart, but I came off as stupid. So if you borrow 6.4, there's your annual payment. And we think there'd be a small amount of that would be specially assessed against properties. You see it, I'm relying fairly heavily on sewer and water and just a little bit on taxes. And because we're relying a little bit on taxes, that means this particular house, which we use 200,000, whatever their city taxes are, doesn't mean their taxes are going to go up 61 bucks. Because remember, see the red? That's the new. So the taxes are still going, the tax rate is still going down. So I'm not saying their taxes go up 61 bucks. All I'm saying is that if their total tax bill, whatever that number is, $61 of it is going to this bond payment. Does that make sense? Okay. So just, we showed you the tax rate. There's going to be no impact. Oh yeah, there is. There, you see the water? So once we issue the debt now, but it's still, kind of surviving. Sewer, not much happening there. It won't have any impact on capital outlay. Are you seeing the blips? Okay, because I see them on my laptop. I don't know if you see them. Total debt per capita. That's market value. So that's the way this thing is going to work. So maybe I'll just kind of start adding these one by one. show you the impacts, and then you guys can tear it apart. Sound good? Okay. Let's get rid of some of these 2022 things. So we have your purchase of water meters.
Yeah, that hasn't happened. I don't know that that matters, but
Well,
yeah.
we were gonna pay that over a 3-year period.
Yeah.
So sewer computer,
That's done.
okay, and well rehab. This is all cash. None of this is borrowed money. And I don't remember what that study was for. Something sewer related, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's all cash. So let's just check the utility funds for those. Follow? And there'll be no impact on any of that because that's all cash. Oh, athletic field. That's a big one. Yes,
Question.
let me stop.
The sewer computers, wasn't that gonna be paid from different?
Yeah, it was ARPA.
Okay.
Yep. And I don't think his model, hopefully, I think it,
I can take it out of, why do I?
part of it, half of it was paid by the utility fund, half of it was ARPA.
Oh,
Utility contributed extra to hold our levy down. So we did a weird
Computer.
budget move, but basically
Oh, yeah,
they contributed $90,000 towards the
correct.
operating. So we use it to just be a,
Yep, I've got 90
Yeah.
from other, which would be ARPA, and then 90 from the sewer
yeah.
fund. Okay, the athletic field. We've got 1.85 million. Again, using present value numbers. 370,000, that's all DNR grant or something, 300,000 grant plus the $70,000 donation. So a borrowing of 1.48 million. Now our annual payment's 108,000. We have that 100% on taxes. Now, some of this stuff, when I said we're gonna rely on sewer and water more, some things you don't have a choice because the discussion we're not having tonight, or at least we won't get too deep into it, has to do with statutory authority. So whenever you say, Mike, we gotta borrow money for this, I'm like, what's my statutory authority for the city to borrow money? And you don't have any authority to use sewer and water for your park project, okay? There are some accounting gimmicks you can do behind the scenes to get it done in an indirect way, but at least on a straight up way. So that's all the 22 and 23 related projects. Let's just focus on those for a moment. Okay, so that went up a little higher. Again, we haven't adjusted any of the utility rates. That hasn't changed. See, that's getting a little bigger now. All right. What do I got over here? Trail extensions, 2025. Oh, that was being cash over a 2-year period. Why do I have that? Okay, I'm showing that on taxes over a 2-year period offset with some cash. That must be a DNR grant.
I think that's what our goal was, but we don't have, we're not even close there. So that was, I think, to sort of build it into the future, but yeah.
Well, let's just leave
Yeah,
it there as a
yeah.
placeholder. And then we've got ambulance, I think that's building improvements of some sort,
Mm-hmm,
and fire.
mm-hmm.
Now we have that over 15 years. I don't know why I didn't do that over 20. These are building projects. They should be able to do it that way. Oops, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? What else I got in 24?
So just kind of to clarify on the fire ambulance haul is that we went out for bid for a combined facility. It came back at more like 1.2 million. Then Darren went back out for kind of a separate bid for a smaller scope project. That's come back at 300,000, but we also know the fire hall needs some ADA improvements. So we're at like 466 in 2024. And then the ambulance haul, that's probably optimistic thinking. We have not gone out for bids on that or even really have a plan. But again, just to build it in, that's about 250 where we're at. So both of those projects.
And that'd be a 2023 project, correct?
We have it as 2024 project. Yeah. Can you hang on that long?
No more costly.
I don't really think it's a big deal. It would just be nice if they could happen in the same year is all.
Yeah.
Is that 216 or 250, does that include the $30,000 that we had for the roof and windows and doors?
It's not really based on an actual estimate. So I would say, it's kind of a placeholder, but.
Because I found a bid that Tony put out for our ambulance roof in 2019, and our roof never got replaced. So,
Yeah, the roof is in there for next year, but yeah,
and I took it as a fire hall was also in there for that,
for 2020.
23.
Let me just change it. Did you say that roof was in the CIP? Coming out of that? Okay.
But just the roof, not the entire ambulance, yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and change these right now, because I don't think this is too big of a deal. All right, 23. So then we have, well, let's do ahead and do the barge. So you have to do, what's this? We do the athletic field first, right? And then the barge, and then trunk highway 60 would happen once you move the athletic field. Am I getting that right? Okay. So the one thing about the barge is there would be a contract with the federal government that says they're going to use this facility for umpty years, right? But
Non-binding.
yeah, that's the bit, right? There's some potential money here. I made a note, but I didn't write anything in it. What was it? Is that what it was?
Just midnight.
Oh, that's right, yeah. That's right. So there's no.
Okay. But I have that being 100% paid for with other, and so if we have this payment of 543,000, it looked like there was a lot more revenue than that coming in, because not only was it covering the bond payment, it was covering operations, and then there was surplus on top of that. And the idea would be to take that surplus and help it pay for some other project. And in this case, we've got it helping pay for trunk highway 60. So I'll plug that trunk highway 2026, which, was some big number offset by 5 million in cash being 100% paid for with barge revenues. And then finally, we've got a second big street, well, it's not nearly as big, street and utility improvement.
And I think, Tony, do you remember how much was the total that we looked at for all streets? I think it was about $4 million. And we kind of picked $2 million in priority projects. So this does not encompass the entire $4 million of projects identified. It's worth noting that.
So let's just see where we're at right now. I think I've got just about everything in there except for one more thing. Come on. All right, so there's that. Now notice this. You see that little drop? So even when I changed the ambulance and fire to 2023, so what I did is I did a sort of custom thing where I said, what if we increased our deposit from that 180 just 1 year? So in 2024, what if we just plugged in, since we moved that, let me change that from 250 to, what if in 1 year we just added a one-time, well, maybe that's too much, but you see where I'm going with this. Let's just, let's go 150. Just to smooth it out. Okay, how's that? So now if I go to, so for in 2024, because the debt going offline was much bigger than the combined of that new debt for 24. I'm smoothing it to that. Remember I said budget to a tax rate? I said, it doesn't work for next year, but maybe going forward it will. And you can see the tax rate staying flat. So let me go to that CIP fund. Why would that go down? Because I think it's because I moved something forward on the first page, but you get the drift. So tax rate page, water bill and sewer looks good. So
I guess I wanted to know, because it felt like people didn't believe me, is that we have a lot of debt coming offline in 2023, 2024. That's why we can sit with these plans and talk about big projects if we want to, but the bump we're seeing next year is due to where our operating cost conversations. So.
yeah, so there's roughly $360,000 in debt levy going offline next year. And that's the big drop.
And plus, water and sewer has debt coming offline too.
Right, and the big one is a 2003 PFA piece of debt. And that's hundreds of thousands of dollars every year too. So. Can you even see that? Okay, yeah.
How much of the water sewer do you have paying for I think we don't have water sewer paying towards the various streets
No,
because
'cause it
we
was all
weren't planning on
Blacktop
going
stuff.
underground. Yeah.
Well, the one section, Market Street, that was 1.2 million for one block of water and sewer curb, the whole works. So
Is that the
would be
one that
partially
we
funded
kept?
by water and sewer.
Okay. So does that need to get adjusted, or does that one of the projects we took?
I would say probably half of that project number that you got should be funded by water and sewer.
Is that a big enough number to stick with this number and just bring water and sewer to help pay for it, or? Okay. And you think water and sewer should pay for about half? Let's go, let's just go 23 and 23. That's pretty close. Now we might have to do a little bit more adjusting then. Yeah. Sewer's fine. Might be a little bigger, but. There we go. So we're probably, what's in question is this first bump, right? This is the weird one. This is the one where we're going in blind. But if you were to say wherever we started from next year, from there, you can see we've scheduled and scoped things in a way to be a little more reasonable growth. So let me go back and, so Caroline, we were on the phone for 2 hours that day. We went back and forth.
Well, I just felt like I want to see personally a worst case scenario, which would be
Right.
very little growth, to just see what does that look like. But if we're looking at only a 4% tax-based growth over time.
The reason I think that
Yeah.
that's not going to be the case is Tyler was good enough to share with me the market values from the county going into next year, but it didn't give me the tax base information. But the market values increased by a much larger percent
did
than
they?
4%.
Okay.
Mhm. So I mean, I'm just extrapolating that into tax
Mhm.
base, but I can't get it exact.
Yeah. So, but I mean, if we think about the potential growth for the city of Wabasha, I mean, I think,
I have almost entirely your tax base growing on inflationary value only,
yeah,
next to nothing in population and homes.
yeah.
So that's at the 10% growth. So yeah, it's this first spike that we don't know. We know there's going to be a bit of a spike. We just don't know if it's this big or about half that big.
So we never talk about the tax, and we talk about it, we review it, just like Jeff and I have to ask ourselves, do we really even understand this annually? We don't budget to it. We dicker about the levy, the percent increase on the levy.
That's
which
fine.
is, it gets frustrating because it feels somewhat arbitrary. This seems more intentional.
If you are budgeting enough money to operate and keep, healthy reserves and things of that nature, and your tax base is growing faster than your levy increases and your tax rate's going down, well, then I guess I'm not too concerned about it. Like the city of Byron, they're growing so hard that they don't budget to a tax rate, but they're budgeting tons of money into a capital improvement fund. I mean, like over $1 million a year into a capital improvement fund. And their tax rate's still doing that, but they can do that. Most of my small towns, though, struggle. You're a little stronger than some, but so I'm like, even if you don't think you need it, budget to a tax rate in a normal year, not this year, because you're going to need that cash. Because we have millions and millions of dollars in here. Okay, now the barge is kind of taking care of it, but if I add all the non-barge stuff, so that's like 10, let's add up all this stuff here. Where is it? And there's another 2.6, that's 12.6 plus what's coming out of the CIP fund itself. I mean, you've got $15 million of spending right here. That's not being covered by barge revenues.
Hopefully the well rehab will be a grant. Department.
But of this 15 million, while that sounds great, I bet we could do double that in a heartbeat. You know what I mean? We're leaving a lot of streets on the table. Well, see, and there's the thing. So even though we're looking like the sewer fund looks okay right now, I'm thinking you need to do small adjustments in the water anyway. Even if the sewer doesn't look like you need it now, you should probably do whatever you politically are willing to do in your sewer in advance of what Brian just said.
I think we decided last go around that we're gonna have to start. And last year we didn't specifically because it was the year we had, we kept it flat. But I think at least the current council on utilities anyway, we see the writing on the wall that we gotta both just have to continually go up at least at some rate.
So here's
So I acknowledge this doesn't include all the projects that were identified this year, because this is kind of something we started last year, but I think, we will have to add those in eventually and keep that on the table. But I just was telling Pat, we got the sewer computer, we did the well rehab, we've got the street project is major. So I'm like, let's just kind of start there. And after the street project is done next year, we come back and see. But yeah, it'll just make all the water sewer rates go up if you tackle any of those projects.
So you can see when we throw in the barge and the athletic field and trunk highway 60, how high it's pushing 7,500. So what we would do is make sure that we have a conversation on how we sell that debt. So if we can't get USDA or PFA funding, we might still do a public sale. We may not get a rating, or maybe we'll get a rating, but we'll do a public sale, but negotiate it as opposed to a competitive sale. We don't decide any of that today.
I think for the barge terminal, we are working on a strategy to lower that $6 million figure. We've acknowledged that that's not even feasible at this point. So just for my own knowledge, if you lowered that 6 million to like 3 million, what does that do for our debt per capita?
That
Okay,
looks,
it's still
that would-
high.
nah, 1 or 2 years out over the line, does that,
Okay.
you're out of it quick.
Okay,
That's something you can explain away. It's when it gets up there and stays up there. That's when it's.
okay.
So I've plugged in 2% a year in water and 2% a year in sewer. And if we go back to that sewer fund, now granted, while I think my projections are reasonable, they're going to be wrong, right? But if we think that conceptually that it'll at least lead to growth, I mean, you're gonna be gaining that, whatever we don't use of that 300,000 every year, you're gonna be get up to, at some point soon, over $1 million.
They need it.
But I mean,
They're gonna-
it's a
yeah.
head start on,
Yeah,
on the
We
treatment plant.
emailed Pat about improvements 2 years ago when the COVID money started to become available. He came up with $750,000 in about 30 seconds, so I think that's gonna change.
Now, it's easy to say 5% a year. And that doesn't sound too bad maybe, but if you 16, that's 25. That's 171. So in 2035, it's gonna cost this house $180 more per month than it did in 2017. So basically 20 years earlier. Wow, right? But I will tell you this. This is not unique to Wabasha. Brian's seen me do this in 100 different places, and I got the same, it's the same stuff over and over again. Nobody can keep up.
so I'll just, walk through some of the debates that we had. Just, does the athletic field, does that fit over, streets? And I think where we landed was the athletic field is key to the trunk highway project. So we included the athletic field, but the trunk highway, the plan is, I think it has to be a combination of even perhaps like a 0.5% sales tax to cover the debt on that future project. So there's no tax levy money going in the trunk highway. So that's changed since last year. And we did that because various streets surfaced as a need that Tony and I thought we were going to get away with like $200,000 in streets or something. And then it, came back at a much larger number. On the downtown borrowing, I'm working with Brian and Katie to see if we can explore if the PFA doesn't come in, maybe some USDA funding again to lower our borrowing rate. We could get like a 0.5% better through USDA
And longer term.
and longer terms. But in speaking with Brian and Katie, there might be some challenges to doing that with the State Historical Society, I think.
Oh,
Yeah, so, although I was willing
We're
to fight that one for
We're
us.
becoming expert in that, moment by moment.
So,
Yeah,
yes, so,
which is worth fighting, that's a bad setup.
so I think looking at this, kind of some of the feedback that I was hoping for is, do we continue with these projects? Are they still the priorities that people want to see prioritized? Because it is definitely our plan for the next. When does our debt come offline again?
well, this immediate one comes off next year.
Yeah, the next, after that, though, this is our kind of project list for the foreseeable future,
Yeah. If
so
you look
that,
at- If you look at this, I mean, it stays pretty level all through there, and if you
Yeah.
go to this page, we don't see any dips really.
Speaking of that, so, the trunk highway 60 is complicated, and, the huge reason why we would want to be on time with that is that there'd be developer interest, which we have none of. So I don't know if is there a negative implication if that gets pushed off longer? If, let's say you make that a 2028, 2029.
Not
It
if
doesn't
barge
create a-
revenues are used to pay for it. And if in the meantime, you keep pushing it off, then just build those barge revenues, build a reserve.
and that requires, I think, convincing Port Authority, of which is a separate entity, to use it for this project, but they are working on that from a housing perspective, so.
Well, here's the trade-off. We can do that borrowing one of two ways for the barge. One is to do a revenue note, which simply tells the bondholders, we're pledging the revenues from the barge operations, the payment of this note. And if they fall short, we're not on the hook to make them. We don't have to levy taxes if we don't want to. Now, to get that done, you're gonna have a way higher interest rate. It's gonna cost a lot. And then you're not gonna wanna free up any revenue for any other, because you're gonna wanna
Make sure you-
build a reserve, right? But you can, port authorities can issue the debt, and this is new to me, by the way. You can issue it with general obligation pledge with city council approval, meaning you'll back it with taxes if you have to. But the trade-off to give them the better terms that that general obligation can provide is their agreement to give you, you know, revenue to help pay for some other projects that you want. Would be the trade.
So I missed something there. We're not using barge funds to pay for the Highway 60 project.
Well,
That's
yes,
what's
We
modeled.
are, okay.
That's how it's modeled.
that's the way I've got it plugged in. You may choose to do something different.
Before we had
Otherwise,
modeled as
we-
taxes.
So we gotta pay for the
And-
barge first with barge revenues and then the Highway 60
Yeah.
project.
And there should be enough revenue to pay for both.
Okay.
if this all takes off. I mean, the trunk highway just definitely seemed like the easiest project, given other factors, to basically say, we'll come up with a plan. It could be hopefully some state funding, or we can do a sales tax, but everything else is prioritized. The big one being the athletic field has been prioritized to at least move, knowing then that still keeps that trunk highway project.
Because even
Yeah.
what's shown on here, the 5 million in, Mike has plugged in cash, for the Highway 60 project, that's not real. I mean, that's something you have to acquire. That's grant, that's
What does that say?
outside money.
Can't read it.
The note's taking it on.
So that would be some type of MinDOT.
1.7 committed by the state.
That's what we asked for.
That's what they told us, they give us return back.
Yeah, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
think get rid of that, because that's really turn back funding that goes to the entity that would take the old Highway 60 alignment. Which now, given the whole situation with the county and not turning back the county roads, that old alignment probably goes to the county, so that 1.7 million.
Okay. So there's not a solid plan for how to fund trunk highway 60 at this point.
Your second largest project, and it doesn't necessarily have to be done.
Right.
We can go without it, it would suck. because
Yeah.
it's not gonna
In
get
which
developed.
case that barge revenue can go pay for something else.
But it's, I mean, other than our debt per capita, you're not seeing it reflected in the tax rates or anything. 'Cause we
Correct.
don't have any,
Okay.
yeah,
That is
or
correct.
even the
Just gotta keep it in
utility or,
sight. Yeah.
it's, keep it there. But,
Keep it in the model.
yeah. And then, of course, I think the other factor that changed is the cost for the downtown project did go up. So,
Something to keep in mind. If the financing for the athletic field in downtown is gonna be conventional borrowing, meaning you're gonna call me, do what you can to try and arrange for those projects to be bid out roughly the same time. Because if you're gonna pay me to go to market, let's go to market once, not twice. But I would also advise you if there is a state or a federal program for either of those,
Trying.
maybe not. But
definitely not for the athletic field, but potentially for the downtown.
So we already got
Yeah.
state money in the athletic fields.
Yeah, yeah. And then we have ambitious fundraising goals for the athletic field, but this is our most conservative estimate. But again, what I found when you look at these sort of big picture models, it will help, but we're not gonna impact a lot, so. But I think, our goal as a team is gonna try to fundraise for more grant funds if we can.
Is, like the water and sewer rates, is that something that Brian, are you guys looking at doing for next year?
the model's doing it for next year and annually. And when I say a 2% increase, I mean a 2% increase in your revenues. So that means base rate, that means volume rate. Sometimes people misunderstand me and they only raise the volume rate. I ain't enough. I say 2%, I mean all the rates.
So yeah, the model assumes that every year they're approving a 2% increase for sewer and water.
Yep.
And so we worked on that last year. That's why we invited them today, but they didn't come. So hopefully you'll pass along the message like, but I think they know that right now, and especially after the 30
We'll have to
million.
Remind
Yeah,
everybody,
yeah,
we decided to do it. but-
yeah.
You're talking like 50 cents.
Oh, yeah.
You know, different things, it's not.
So on a 5,000 gallon user on the water, the first adjustment is 45 cents. You know, if you use less, it'll be less. If you use more, it'll be more. And the sewer on a 5,000 gallon user, it is a buck, let's just round up, $1.20. So less than $2 between the two. It just, it all adds up together when you add in the taxes too, so.
So I had some questions in terms of no final decisions, but if you could go back to projects, which projects are going to require that they do vote on borrowing for next year? Obvious, none. Okay.
So on the downtown project, this is going to probably be basically a dual authority. I'm going to use improvement 429, Brian, and then 444 sewer and water. We'll bifurcate that as needed to make sure the assessments work. That's geek talk for us. You guys just ignore that. And then for the authority on the athletic field, I'll do just what I did in Byron, and that's tax abatement authority. And there's a public hearing, but there's nothing wonky with it. And none of it counts against net debt limits.
Can I say one thing about, so in the downtown project, when Mike, when you plug in 8% for assessments, that has no relation to what you're assessing.
Individual property.
When we say we're assessing 8% in Mike's model, that doesn't mean we're
Yep.
assessing people 8%.
Right, it's correct.
You're gonna assess 20% of the assessable costs, which are less than the total project.
Yeah, it's basically 8% of the borrowing amount. So 8% of that 6 million.
So just don't be confused about that. when you're talking to people about assessment and how much you're assessing.
The other way to look at it is this payment of $475,000, 8% of that payment would be covered with assessment revenue. Oh, and by the way, that's something important to note. This does not include assessment impacts because everyone's is going to be different based on the size of their lot.
And then, okay, and then for the ambulance fire hall.
Cool. So we've got that as 23 project as well. Again, if all of these things can time out at the same time, in terms of authority, you know what, the fire hall, I would tell you to contact USDA. There is a statute, 465 something or another. You can borrow up to $450,000 through the USDA and you don't have any public hearings or anything like that. If I finance the fire hall and the ambulance, I would probably have to hold a public hearing and have a 30-day petition period where 5% of your voters could stop it. Ambulance would be subject to that. The only way to get around that on the ambulance is to do something we call a lease purchase, where we have a bank or the Port Authority. I don't know. Do you really want to go in the weeds?
No,
Okay.
Just
I just-
contact USDA
I
about
would
later.
just, well,
Yep.
there will be votes, but I think these are all the big projects for next year if you guys
But
want them, yeah.
to the extent none of these, anything that you're going to have me work on, it would be nice. Now, from my perspective, I say, hey, do it 4 to 5 different times. Bring me in as many times as you want. Love it. Right? I like to play golf. I could use a new set of clubs. But for your sake, the best thing to do is try and get these things timed. So we're going roughly the same. They don't have to be exact, but close enough so that when we borrow money, you can just do it all at once.
So that'd be ambulance, athletic field, streets.
Yep. Assuming fire, you would go with the USDA. And that would really be what you want to do. And you might be able to do 40 years on that if you want to. I don't know. Well, the thing about USDA, if they offer you 40 years, is they allow prepayment at any time without penalty. So if you want to send in a few extra $1,000 every year, you could do that, just like your mortgage on your house. Now, one thing about USDA is they usually don't fund until after construction. So you'd either have to lean on cash, or you could bring me in to do temporary financing, but I think you could lean on cash. And then when it's
So,
done,
yeah, the other thing, when we talk about reserves, is right now, we are paying out cash to cover all the time for Katie's time and her team on the downtown. We will have, planning and engineering on the athletic field. The barge terminal, we're using cash, or we're using a lot of like cash investments now, and then
getting
borrowing and paying
so
ourselves back.
22 audit could look a little weird in terms of your cash reserves, but know that when you finance these things, they'll be reimbursed.
Anybody scared?
I'm just wondering
Okay.
what's not there, you know, you discussed a little bit of streets that, you know, is there other things that you
I
are
think-
not there? The spreadsheet got too wide, so it's like there's a limit.
We put some in the capital improvement plan, 200,000 next year, 200,000 in 2 years after that for streets. We used to save up and do 400,000. We did that for like 6 years in a row. 6 years in a row. Worked out good. And what I wanted to do with that downtown project is take on some more mill and overlay. We added it up, and what I would think would be 400,000 came back as, 2 million.
The secret is to don't call the engineers,
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
at least not for a price.
Yeah.
So what's missing is any plan for, I mean, at some point, we talked about a combined facility of some sort. City hall ambulance or city hall ambulance police, that is off the table in this plan. And not that we could figure out a plan, but just kind of, we're prioritizing, I would call, expenditure on the city, as we've typically done for some minor improvements to existing buildings. So I know that concerns Tony, because he sees some of the maintenance issues we did talk about, and we still have plans to get a holistic look at buildings, but
And did anything come
Yeah.
from that preliminary, whatever preliminary research they did to present the pitch to us that caused alarm for you? I mean, you know what's in this repair.
Yeah, I guess, to me, when I look at it, if we add those two together, the fire and ambulance, and you're gonna do 450 and 250, so you're at $700,000 versus rehab, most of it combined, and it's 1.2. What's your best investment, And I don't specialize in that. I don't know.
I think that conversation has to be had yet. I think we left Aaron sort of investigating what the cost of just to do smaller projects were. We're assuming what ambulances, so I don't know if you want to discuss that at a council level sooner rather than later, or have a smaller group. There was a group assembled to discuss it. I think at one point I was tasked with looking at what would be new. I roughly figured $3 million for new, so.
Yeah, I think the delta between the repairs and the combined new is a lot bigger than I think it is.
One thing I'm worried about, like Karen got the quote, like an idea from Carl's, but if we spend over a certain amount, it's gotta be engineered, and what, the amount on that? 250 or
Square footage.
Mike, but it's a certain, we have our purchasing policy, like,
All competitive bidding.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, isn't it 175 nowadays?
yeah, and then when you jump over 250, it has to be engineered structurally. I mean, it's gotta be.
Not because of cost, just
That's a building classification.
Okay.
I wouldn't know, I don't know. If I ever did know, it would have been 20-something years ago.
That's basically, it's there in the budget, but we probably need it put our heads together again. I mean, we sat and discussed this many a time, you know, what's the best? And I talked to you and I was like, there's not a lot of room for more than what we've got, but we know it's a need. So I'm struggling with that one.
Well, then we hired the company and they come in and they're like, well, here's your 3 different options. And it's like, what do you recommend? You know, we hired you to basically do a feasibility study on it, and we don't get very many answers out of it. Didn't cost us a lot of money, but I'm still perplexed on that one too. It's, they recommend doing it together, but I don't remember anymore.
Well, it just wasn't a lot of positive information out of there. It just wasn't, it wasn't what we were looking for, it came back kind of different. There was a lot of money spent there that I didn't feel it needed to be spent there, and that's where we kind of went back to the basics, because I feel like we were doing so much improvements and so much the things we didn't need to do. And I'm not saying I wouldn't like a combination building or a better building or whatever, but I don't see it as a need. We put this addition on the back of the fire hall. I feel like our fire station will be sitting good for a while. So elections and everything, we just need some updated inside, but that's mild stuff. And I don't feel we need to go into and I'll bring back, I mean, looking at Cassin's ambulance fire station that they're putting together, the fire station alone, they put ambulance in with it on a couple of them different things, and they're over $5 million. I mean, I think we're just way out of league for what we need for, we're just looking to get, you know, what we need, what are our needs, not what
You gonna get a ladder truck in that?
we need a ladder truck in there now. We
Okay.
have one in there now, but it's just an addition off the back to give us the storage that we have. Right now, we're using half the city shop for our equipment because we don't have the room, and we'd be able to bring that down. And elections would give more room for elections, and that would give us, it's just it's a need that we've needed for 15 years. And it's finally to this point. So,
I don't think we're as prepared for the ambulance hall, because I think we've had some discussions. Is that building worth adding 250,000 to? Because it's being used as like a 24/7 building, where increasingly people are there 24/7, but it was built back when we had a volunteer department where I don't imagine people were there all the time. So I think some of the challenges, I think the plan we saw provided a combined building that it didn't feel like, it wasn't that all parties were not satisfied with that 1.2 million plan.
And
Yeah.
didn't take into consideration financial position of the city. So it was design choices.
Yeah.
And
So,
then Ryan's on board now, so that'll help, but we didn't have anybody in that spot to help, and we're like, well, we're gonna make decisions for the
For
ambulance that we
future
don't really know
Has
is,
to live with,
you
yeah.
know, proper for them, but now we can kind of start over with that. Ryan can have some input on that too.
Because we really need 2 bedrooms. I mean, right now we have, at times, we have a male and a female that are from out of town that are staying there, which isn't ideal that one of them sleeps in a bedroom and the other one sleeps on a couch. We do have shower facilities, however, our storage, if the general public knew this, they'd probably be appalled and probably wouldn't do any more CPR classes. But all of our CPR mannequins are currently stored in the bathroom, and you can literally touch CPR mannequins while you're sitting on the toilet. Because I have no other place to store them. Our trucks have gotten bigger from when when the building was originally built. And we have mere inches on either side of the door, or the mirrors, and you can already see where people have backed into. I mean, I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I've almost hit my mirrors on there. So for our new people who haven't done that much backing in, and we're gonna end up having to spend a bunch of money on fixing mirrors or door frames, and so.
So yeah, 250 is potentially low, but that's where we've had some discussions. you know, is this a building worth investing into? But then if we didn't invest in that building, I have no idea where it would go, so.
In the
Yeah.
CIP, we have the roof, the windows,
Mm-hmm,
and the doors,
mm-hmm,
the walk-in doors.
yeah,
And that's not in this, that's in
Yeah.
the CIP for next
Yeah.
year. But if we're gonna change a whole bunch of stuff, we stick to $25,000 worth of windows and doors on it.
I think we
Well-
decided to just do the roof next
And what
year,
I
yeah.
told her, I said, if we're going to look long-term, like, I don't think we can wait, 3 years to update some of these things, but regardless of what we do, the roof needs to be replaced, because I literally have shingles missing. The windows and doors, we can get around that and put up plastic or do whatever we have to do, but, I mean, regardless of what we decide to do, the roof needs to be replaced as soon as possible, because otherwise we're gonna have leaking and it's gonna cause more issues.
Backside's looking a lot worse than the side everybody sees.
Yeah.
Well, if this looks and feels, like I said, you're not committing to anything yet, but if this looks and feels like the model, generally what I do is I PDF all the graphs and so forth, send it in an email and just bullet point the highlights of the conversation, ship that over for you guys to share. So,
We've been really excited about how many new houses are going up in town, but I remember you saying they pay for like, what, 60% of themselves?
they cost more than they, yep.
Yeah.
You gotta have people. I mean, obviously you need employees, you need customers. But when you have to redo their streets 20 years from now, they're not paying enough in taxes to get it done.
That's why public sector is just so rewarding.
Doom and gloom.
But we can't talk about it like that because they vote. So we say nice things like. Yeah. But yeah, that's true everywhere.
You see it for proposed tax increases. Around,
For like levies. Anywhere from. I think 5 is probably the low end. Usually year to year, I see anywhere from like 2 to 8. Now it's more like 5 to whatever. Every town's gonna be different.
I need to step out for another meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Concluding, Jeff, did you have anything?
Just want to cry.
Right, well, thank you guys,
Yeah, thank
and if
you.
you
Thanks, Mike.
have any feedback or changes, let me know. It obviously, I think you pointed out, it doesn't even cover everything. But it does take care of some major projects too, so.
I know we're gonna all have to take a deep breath when we get the facilities assessment, because it's gonna make it look like we have 3 times as much work to do as we currently think.